Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I just switched audio inputs, so welcome to our, well, it's many installments later in our FarmOps series, but our first installment of Meat Birds. We're really excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us on such a nice day. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Whoa, that shared a lot of stuff. That was not right.
Yeah, I don't know what it was supposed to be doing, but it definitely didn't do it.
No, it's supposed to share my PowerPoint. No, it didn't do it again. Okay.
So while Amy's getting her slides up, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you run into any issues, let me put my phone number in the chat. I'm running tech tonight, so feel free to text or call and I can help get you connected if for some reason you get disconnected. The other thing that we want to mention too, if you've been to any of our webinars before, you know that we really, really, really appreciate your feedback. So we're going to include a link to the follow-up survey in the chat towards the end of the program. We'll hang on for a little bit for you to fill that out. And please let us know if there are other topics you want or any other feedback that you have about this webinar. So we'll be sharing that. Your video and your sound has been disabled, so we can't hear you, we can't see you. If you have any questions, put those in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll address them as we go along. So don't feel like you have to save those until the end. Yep. Amy, it's looking good on this side of things.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you, Katelyn, for the wonderful housekeeping introduction as I was trying to get my ducks in a row. My ducks are actually squirrels and they're everywhere, but that's okay. All right. So tonight's seminar is a partnership that we have enjoyed for the past couple of years with Cornell's Small Farms Veterans Project FarmOps. We're really thankful to have their support, not only to provide this to you, but also to cheer us on, to help us bring topics to you that are of most importance to you. And they have also supplied some funding for us to do some videography. So there's not going to be any videography in this particular presentation because we're saving it for the next broiler presentation, which is going to be essentially all videos. What we're going to do is we're going to do some live broiler processing demonstrations and equipment setups and all sorts of super fun stuff. So looking forward to having you there. So my name's Amy Barkley. I'm the Livestock and Beginning Farm Specialist with the Southwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops Program. Katelyn Walley-Stoll is our Farm Business Management Specialist. I'll be lead presenter tonight. Katelyn will be running tech. We cover a 5-county region in southwestern New York, including Erie, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Allegany, and Steuben counties. But with the generous funding from FarmOps, we're able to supply this webinar to veterans both in the whole state of New York and in New Jersey. So our job as specialists on our team is to bring research-backed information from Cornell University to the farm level. And we're really excited to do that. We love what we do. That's why if you have any questions at all, please feel free to pop them in the chat. This is our team right here. So we're 204. If you have any questions related to production of any of these different topics and you are within our region, feel free to reach out. If you're not sure who to reach out to us and we will direct you to somebody who can help. So my background is that I am actually a poultry scientist by training. So poultry is near and dear to my heart. I grew up on a small poultry farm. I studied poultry in college and I worked in the commercial poultry industry. So I've worked with both layers and broilers in multiple facets, from everything from small flocks of 30 birds up to flocks of millions of birds. So I'm happy to bring that experience here tonight. And I'm really excited because there's a lot of stuff in industry that we can incorporate into some of our smaller poultry production to help us become more efficient and more economically viable if that's something that we want to go. So if we want to raise birds for ourselves, that's one thing. If we want to go into production for other people, that's another thing, and we want efficiencies. So I'm happy to bring that information to you tonight. I also run a small poultry farm here in East Concord, New York. Katelyn also has a small farm that she runs, diversified operation. Yep. So we both, well, we've raised broilers, we raise egg layers. So it's a whole lot of fun.
I'll just add too that I never would have thought that I would raise meat broilers, but with Amy's encouragement and just her saying like, these are the exact steps that you need to do. This year, we're hoping to do about 200 and sell them off of our farm. So you guys are in for a treat. Amy, this is her jam, and she is so smart and so intelligent. So please be sure to ask questions while she's here.
Yeah, thanks, Katelyn. I appreciate that. Disclaimer before we get started, this information is for educational reference purposes only, not a substitute for, in this case, it's going to be mostly a veterinary consult. We can help pinpoint some things, but we can't actually make diagnoses and we can't prescribe medication. So just keep that in mind. If you ever need to do that, contact a veterinary professional. If you have any technological issues, I suggest you reach out to Katelyn. Her number is the first number in this text, screen that you see here. I won't be able to answer messages because I'm talking. I can't multitask super well. So if you'll please send any issues to her, she can work with you to get them resolved. These are a couple of our upcoming webinars. We have a goat discussion circle on May 24th at 6 p.m. This is essentially a culmination of all the goat things that we've done last year. So we did a lot of Goats 101. We did a four series webinar series on goats. And so this opportunity is to bring all your questions. We'll go over some of the basic foundation topics for raising goats, and then you can ask all the questions and we'll get them answered live. Hogs, Hops, and Honey Oh My is a farm diversification webinar. So how do you make your farm more diverse and more economically pliable within this economy? Katelyn's going to present that on June 7th at 6 p.m. We have the poultry processing for meat production. That's going to be the super fun one with lots of videos. That's going to be on Wednesday, July 12th at 6 p.m. And then we have protecting against Murphy's Law. So essentially things go wrong, they will go wrong. And Katelyn's going to share how to help get yourself ready for those small or large setbacks and how to go forward from them. So that's going to be October 4th at 6 p.m. And then finally, we have making a farm business plan that works for you. Of course, if we want to get into farming as a business versus farming as a hobby, there are some steps we need to follow. And this presentation will go through all of the things, and that will be Wednesday, November 1st. And finally, the show that you've all come here for, raising chickens for meat. So these are actually some slow growth broilers, and we'll talk about slow growth versus conventional in a little bit. But first, we want to make sure that we impress her with something expensive. Eggs have come down a little bit, but I think it still applies. I would like you to, before we get to the poll, I'd like you to write down one thing that you'd like to learn today. You can text it to yourself, you can message it to yourself, whatever you'd like. And we want to make sure we get that one question answered for you today. And our poll question is, why do you want to raise broilers? Well, getting to know you. So our first question is, who are you and what are you doing with broilers? Where are you currently? So the options are, there's already a meat bird in my garage or meat birds in my garage, pretty close to raising meat birds, but not there yet. I want some more information before I commit, or oops, I don't know why I'm here. We'll just give you a couple seconds. Okay, so the poll's been ended and it looks like we have a pretty good split between folks that already have meat birds versus those who are getting ready and want more information before they commit. So we really appreciate you sharing that. Thanks so much. All right. So our next poll is, why do you want to raise broilers? And this isn't going to be a poll that comes up, but we're going to pop the answers into the chat instead. There's a whole variety of reasons why folks raise broilers, and we're curious to know why you want to get into it. So we'll give you a couple seconds to pop some answers into the chat, and then we'll go ahead and read them. So we have folks that want a better meat supply, whether that could be better as in more consistent, that can be better as in we want to know exactly what's going into our meat animals. We have some that want to raise broilers to diversify a farm business. Awesome. An income source for food. Yep, that's why we're doing it. I'd like to use my 100 acres to grow food. Interesting for raising broilers for sale across state lines. Awesome. We'll cover that. make some money, better food choices, possible income. I like the word possible because we can raise broilers to be profitable or unprofitable. The choice is yours. So we'll discuss a little bit of that. Amy told me to, well, farm designation feasibility, healthier. This is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I think there's a really wide variety. I'm not seeing a huge common theme here, and that's absolutely fine. That's really cool because we all have our individual reasons, and I think they're all really important. So tonight we're going to discuss breeds of broilers. There's 3 main categories: brooding and nutrition, housing, biosecurity, enterprise efficiency considerations, and then finally regulations for processing and sale. So let's start off with breeds. This bird is probably one that you guys have heard of before. It is the Cornish cross. It is it's a sumo wrestler in terms of its body type, but it is a race car in terms of what it does. It is the fastest growing and the most efficient broiler cross we have out there. It has been selectively bred since the 1950s to grow a double muscled breast and to grow that in the most efficient way possible. It only takes about 2 pounds of food per pound of live gain on these birds, which is just mind-blowing. And then we have to consider they're ready to process. So we get them as peeps, right? They're ready to process by 7 to 8 weeks of age. Amazing. And they can weigh up to 4.5 to 7 pounds, depending on when you process them. If you process them closer to 5 or 6 weeks, I like to call them KFC sized. So when you get a bucket of KFC chicken and you're looking at the size of those pieces, that's a 5-week-old broiler chicken, a Cornish cross. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how large you want to grow out your birds. These birds have been developed for white feathering so that when we pluck them, we don't see pin feathers sticking in the carcass. But all of these traits that we put into these birds have resulted in a bird that eats, poops, sleeps, and grows. They're not super energetic. They're not super foragers, and they're not super bright either. And they're also sensitive to disruptions in the environment. Things like rain, things like snow, things like predators, things like heat. These birds don't typically do well under stress. Some strains do better than others. So that's just something to consider if you want to get into Cornish crosses. The next type we have is slow growth. This is a wide category, but to skinny it down a little tiny bit, what this is breeds that grow similarly to a Cornish cross, but have characteristics of a heritage type egg-laying breed, which we'll discuss next. They grow somewhere in the middle of those two. So they take about twice the feed to only get about 2/3 the size and about an extra third of the time that it would take a Cornish cross broiler to reach market weight. They're all different kinds of feathering. There's red, there's barred, there's some whites, and there's all different types of growth rates too. So some of these crosses grow very similarly to a Cornish cross. Some don't. Some have relatively wide breast meat. Some have relatively more leg meat. Some of them forage really well. Some of them are kind of dumb. They don't do very much. Some of them feather fast, some of them feather slow. Some of them are harvestable at 14 weeks, some of them are harvestable at 9 weeks. So you're going to have to do your research in regards to what exact cross you're looking for that meets your management style. But generally, they forage a little better, and they're typically not as sensitive to disruptions in the environment. So if you get a freak snowstorm, if you get a heat spell, these birds are not going to react as adversely as a Cornish cross would.
Amy,
Yeah.
along one of the comments that came up, could you reference or provide some examples of like specific slow growth breeds that folks might want to look at?
Okay, yeah. So this is not all inclusive. This is not me recommending breeds. We have things like Murray's Big Red Broiler, the Ginger Broiler, the Delaware Broiler, Kosher Kings, Red Bros, Freedom Rangers, Jackie Rangers, white slow growth broilers, or just called white slow growth broilers. There's a whole gambit, and there are different hatcheries that also have their own types of slow growth broilers that they've developed. So there's a whole ton out there. Generally, if you're looking at a hatchery website and you see Cornish or Cornish cross or Cornish game hen, those birds are going to be the fast growing white feathered birds. If you see something called slow growth or heritage broiler, those are typically going to be these slow growth. But watch out, because you may confuse slow growth broilers with heritage broilers. Heritage broilers are an entirely different beast because They are less efficient. It's just what they are. Heritage broilers, by definition, are those broilers, are those males of egg type chickens. They're called broilers because that's the time period that we harvest them, but they don't grow anything like a Cornish cross, and not really very similarly to a slow growth type broiler either. Their feed efficiency is between 4 and 6 pounds of feed per 1 pound of live gain. When we think about feed being about, let's see, trying to think of the economy feed and what the price is right now. I think it's $48 a hundred. So like, let's say 50 cents a pound. It's going to cost you about $3 to put a pound of live gain on these birds. They're not super efficient, but the trade-off is they're usually super cheap. You can hatch them yourself and they breed true. They are amazing at foraging. They don't get a whole lot out of it, but they are amazing at foraging. They have amazing flavor. They're robust. Basically, once they're feathered, nothing kills them. And sometimes markets are interested in these type birds because of their better texture, that being a more firm texture, sometimes more chewy, and better flavor, which is in part because you're growing them out from 14 to 20 weeks. So you're taking extra time to grow these birds out, but some folks find that it's worth it. And if you have an operation, or if you have a flock of birds that you're hatching birds yourself, and just say you're keeping the females for egg production, you can then also keep the males as a co-product, not a byproduct. A co-product is a product that is of economic significance to you. Grow those birds out and then harvest them for meat. So another option you could look at. But with these egg-laying breeds, there's huge variability in finished size and growth rate. So these are some cockerels that I grew out a couple of years ago. And you can see this little gray one in the middle is super leggy. I think it's a Leghorn Americana cross. It is just like all legs and nothing else. Very light breasted, very light muscled in general. And then you've got something like a Buff Orpington, which is probably another 50% more than this bird, even though they're the exact same age. And then there are some breeds of dual purpose heritage type breed chickens, egg-laying type breed chickens, that will be more meaty on average. The males will be. So I would say do your homework, understand at what processing age these birds will ultimately be desirable at. The longer you take them out, the tougher they're going to be, but the better they're going to taste. So that's all up to you. This is an interesting link. This is to a SARE, a Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education project, where a farmer grew out multiple heritage, so egg type breeds of chickens for meat, processed them, and then did all the data on them. So you can see what their efficiencies are, what their growth rates are, what the subjective taste was of them, and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in raising heritage cockerels, go ahead and check this out. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions about breeds before moving on to brooding.
You're doing good. So we had a request to type out some of the breeds that you mentioned in the chat, so I added those in there. Somebody shared that they accidentally had a Red Ranger. They didn't realize that it was a meat chicken, and they think that it might have died of a heart attack because it was dead one of those days. So other than that, we are good to go.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good point. So with the meat type chickens, whether they be slow growth or they be Cornish cross, we're going to put the egg type cockerels in another category. Those birds first are not created to be crossed back and to create genetically similar offspring. They're going to be different. And the second thing is they're not made to live very long. They're made to live until they produce meat, then they're made to be killed and consumed. They just don't have the cardiorespiratory system to live for a long time. Yes, you may get a slow growth bird to live a little longer, but they're not going to live the full life of a typical laying hen. All right, so brooding. I'm going to go into the bare basics of this just because there's a lot of us who are new, and so I want to make sure that we cover all the basics. Brooders are actually very simple. What you need is some sort of thing to contain your chicks that is large enough so that the chicks can get away from light and get to food and water. You need some sort of heat source and some sort of light source, chick starter feed, and water. That's it. And then we recommend that you prepare the brooder ahead of time. So 24 hours in advance of when your chicks come, you want to get it all cleaned out. You want to get feed there. The water you can fill the day of to make sure it's nice and warm. But you will turn on the heat lamp for that 24 hours prior to arrival. It'll warm the bedding, warm the ambient environment. And when you move those birds from the shipping box into the brooder, that shipping stress is going to be abated a little bit because you've created a really cozy environment for them as soon as they get to your farm. There are a couple of different types of brooders you can look at. This is a ring brooder, so you can purchase individual panels from some farm supply stores. I got this from an online farm supply store. I haven't seen them in brick and mortar stores. What you do is you essentially lock the panels together in whatever shape you want, and it'll create a brooder. The nice thing about it is you could take apart the panels and clean and sanitize them in between flocks. The bad thing about it is once meat birds hit about 2 weeks old, they're going to be big, right? So a meat bird chick at 2 weeks old is about the size of a grapefruit. And when they all pile up against a corner, can knock a corner down and get out of the brooder. So for meat chicks, I recommend something a little more sturdy than this, but this is something that could be viable for the first 2 weeks. This is what's called an Ohio brooder. This is a very old brooder. This image on the left-hand side is from 1943 from the Ohio State University. And how it works is essentially it is simulating a mother hen. There is a box made out of plywood typically, and there is a heat lamp bulb inside that box. Sometimes there's a heat lamp bulb on either end of that box, and that bulb will heat the underside of the box, and the chicks, as they're cold, can go under, get warm, and then pop out and do their environmental things. They can eat, they can drink, and then they go back under. And this simulates a mama hen. These are relatively safe. I would definitely look into designs to build one if you're looking to build one. And yeah, that's an option. If you're looking into Ohio brooder basics, or looking into how you can become a more sustainable farming system, that being, I'm using sustainable very loosely. Sustainable is in hatching your own chicks, keeping the cockerels, raising the cockerels. Kingbird Farm and Cornell Small Farms Program partnered together about 10 years ago or so to create a YouTube series about how they do all their chicken things. Highly recommend watching this as a reference if you haven't already. I think it's super cool. And it definitely shows how this kind of an operation can be viable. So back to heat lamps. We're going to talk about safety for a second. Heat lamps are inherently pretty dangerous. They should only be used for chicks. Once those chicks get fully feathered, once they can get to the point of where they can knock a heat lamp down, take the heat lamp out. We can choose heat lamp designs that are more or less safe. The design, let me get my little pointer here. The design all the way on the left-hand side here, I haven't seen a ton of these around. I last saw one at a big box store, and it was for reptiles. But I haven't seen one specifically used for poultry designed this way. The reason it's not safe is the heat lamp bulb will reach to the end of this metal contraption, the metal cover, and then if this heat lamp falls into the litter or the bedding material, that heat lamp bulb is in direct contact with the litter and it can start a fire. The heat lamp bulbs are hot enough that they can do that. So I don't recommend this style. Nowadays, this cover is longer, so it covers the entirety of the bulb. And then there's typically some other sort of wire connection in between these two intersecting wires. So there's a little less chance of it causing a fire. It's still dangerous if it falls. These other two options are a little less dangerous if they fall. They put out a little less heat because the bulb is held up inside of these type of heat lamps, but they are a safer option if you're looking to use heat lamps and you're not necessarily sure if you want to go the route of the bare bones basic heat lamp. In general, heat lamps should be kept a minimum of 24 inches from flammable surfaces. That means don't get a little tiny cardboard box and put a heat lamp in it. A, chicks can't get away and they might cook. B, it could cause a fire. So in addition, we want to secure hangers for heat lamps. In this picture, this is actually my brooding barn. We have a heat lamp and it is connected to a chain that is screwed into the ceiling. Don't recommend baler twine. Don't recommend fishing line. I would use a chain to connect your heat lamp to a solid surface where it's not going to pull out. These plugs are plugged directly into a wall outlet. That is the safest way to run them. Typically, you don't want to use extension cords just because that's an extra length where something can go wrong. There's a power draw dip there too. And you want to make sure that whatever plug you're plugging these heat lamps into, there's a breaker on the other side that can trip if something goes wrong. These type heat lamps, this is the safer version I was talking about of like the OG heat lamp on the last slide, where they've got a little bit longer of a base and some more rings so that it'll be safer when it falls into the litter. If it falls into the litter, hopefully it will never. But they also have thick cords, so they can handle that power to supply the 250 watts for the light bulb to heat the ambient environment. And so, yeah, just keep them out of reach chickens and you should be good to go. When we think about light, we have two options. Most of us have probably seen red light bulbs for sale at farm supply stores, but there's also white ones, and I don't recommend white ones, and here's why. So chickens can see in the ultraviolet, and they're really attracted to the color red. If you'll notice, they'll pick at anything that's red. And if we have an ambient environment that is made with white light, the biggest thing is chickens will peck on each other. Broilers poop a lot. And so when they poop, their little chicken butt involutes. So it like pushes out a little bit and it sucks back in once the pooping is over. But when that vent is involuted, the other chicks will see it and pick it, and they can actually kill chicks just from pecking at the vent because it's red and it's interesting and they want to peck at it. Now, if you have red light in your brooder, everything looks red. And the chickens don't go and attack other chickens if they see a little spot of blood or an involuted vent. In terms of the light intensity, just go with the 250-foot light bulb. And you can keep it on for 24 hours a day until those chicks can be weaned off of it. Typically, we keep it on when we're getting to the weaning off stage, we'll keep it on during the night and turn it off during the day until they get to a point where they don't need the heat light anymore. And most of these lights are both heat and light combos. We don't typically see it where you have a separate lighting system and a separate heating system. That's normally only in bigger poultry facilities, but you might have that. And if you have questions about that, let me know. In terms of space, we already discussed we want something large enough where the chicks can access everything within the box, but they can get away from the heat source should they need to. There should be a substrate on the floor. Don't just leave newspaper on the floor. Broiler chicks grow really, really fast, and they have rather weak ligaments and things in their legs. And so they could develop what's called spraddle leg, where they don't have enough purchase with their feet on the paper, and the feet will slip out from under them, and it can cause something called splay leg. And if the legs splay, the broiler's done. They're growing too fast to recover from that sort of thing. They're putting on too much weight, and they really can't get their legs back under them. This is why we recommend starting with wood chips or a paper towel or straw or something on the bottom of that brooder on top of paper to help those chicks gain purchase when they walk around. Heat is really important. We already talked about, we want to make sure the chicks can get away from the heat. If you see so what this is a chart, it's a turkey chart, but we're going to pretend these are broilers. They work the exact same way. But so the way that this chart works is that the dark blue circle is the brooder ring. So in commercial production, you'll sometimes put birds in a ring with a heat source in the middle of the ring. And so that's what this is depicting here. You can imagine it being a square box, up to you. Now, the light blue circle on the inside is your heat source. So if the temperature is correct, these little birds are going to be all spread out in the brooder. There's going to be some eating, some drinking, some sleeping away from the heat lamp, some sleeping under the heat lamp. If it's too hot, everybody's going to be pushed to the side of the box or the shed or whatever vessel you're holding them in for that brooding time. In that case, what you'll do to lower the temperature is raise the heat lamp up. And by raising it off the ground, you will decrease the ambient temperature within the brooder and decrease the temperature directly underneath that heat light. And that's the way we moderate temperature in small flocks. If the temperature is too low, everybody's going to be huddled under the heat lamp. They're going to not want to eat necessarily. The drive to eat is very strong, but They might refuse to eat more than they would. And so to fix that, we lower the light until the birds start to go around their environment and look comfortable. And of course, if we have a draft, the birds will huddle in the direction of where the draft is coming in, not where the draft is hitting on the other side of the brooder. So let me rephrase that another way. If we have wind coming in and hitting this side of the brooder, if chicks went over here, they'd get chilled. And so their natural reaction is to go against the side of the box where that draft is coming from. So if you see birds all piled on one side of the box, check for drafts and go ahead and fix those, and then the birds should spread back out. We want to start our brooder at about 95 degrees, the level of the chicks' backs. They came from an incubator that was 100 degrees. Their body temperature will regulate around 106 degrees, but that won't happen for a couple of weeks until their metabolisms start to build up, until they start to eat a little bit more and gain a little bit more weight. So with broilers, start them at 95 degrees, which is, relatively warm underneath that heat light. And then every week, you're going to raise that heat lamp to decrease the temperature by 10 degrees. You don't need to follow this to a T. If the birds look comfortable, go ahead and leave the light where it is. If they look too hot, raise the light. If they look too cold, lower the light. That's a really easy way to check without having to have a thermometer in the brooder. Once those chicks hit about 2 to 4 weeks of age, they're going to have enough body size on them where they can go outside. You'll want to make sure that the outside temperature is above 60 degrees at night. Little birds can't really handle big temperature swings, especially if there's rainy or windy or otherwise wet weather. They don't do super well this time of year. They don't do super well in the fall. So if it's this time of year or the fall where it's a little cooler at night, you're going to wait a little longer to put them out versus that 2 weeks that you can get away with in like July and August, for instance. Okay, when we think about feed, we want to have 24/7 access to feed. We are currently working with a bunch of producers across the state to do a study on broiler production efficiencies. And what we're finding is that birds that are restricted from feed don't grow as well. And so 24/7 access is what we usually recommend. If the birds have leg issues, if the birds are having cardiac issues, so where they can't, it seems like they're breathing heavy or they're turning a little purple or something like that, they're maybe a little bit too big for their britches. So we restrict their feed to restrict their growth so that the rest of their body catches up, so that their legs catch up, so that their cardiorespiratory system catches up. But when they're chicks, I wouldn't restrict before they're 4 or 6 weeks old. Once they get bigger, that's when that becomes an issue. But when they're little, you want to have food in front of them at all times. Make sure that the chicks can find it. They'll typically find it on their own. So when you get them at home, dip their beaks in water, then make sure, like I dip their beak in water and they plop them on the food so they know exactly where it is. This is a feeder that is open. I recommend that for the first couple of days. And then once they start making a huge mess by scraping all the feed out of the feeder, you can go ahead and put the cover on to limit feed waste. In terms of chick feed, brand really doesn't matter. So you'll go ahead and choose something that is called Chick Starter for the first few weeks, and then something called Chick Grower going forward. Or if you don't have a starter and a grower separate in your area, you can buy a starter grower. That'll do the same thing. You'll want to feed what's called a mash or a crumb until they're 4 or 5 weeks old. What's in this person's hand is a mash. So that is feed where all of the feed components, the soybeans, the corn, the wheat, the minerals, it's all loose and it's in like a powdery form. You can go ahead and feed that, or feed a crumb where they take that powdery feed, throw it through a pelletizer so it makes little pellets, and then they crush the pellets up to make crumbs. I would go ahead and feed either of those two. Don't feed pellets until they're at least 4 to 5 weeks old. Chickens can only eat feed that is the size that their beak can handle. So when they're little, they can't handle pellets. And so even though they have feed in front of them, they're going to starve. So go ahead and feed either a mash or a crumb, and you should be good to go. Now, there are two options in terms of feed types. So I said brand doesn't matter, and it doesn't. You can either get a starter grower that's made for laying chicks or all flock, or a broiler specific starter feed. There are some small feed mills in New York State that I'm aware of that will produce what's called a broiler grower or a broiler starter, and you can purchase that to grow your broilers. One thing that I do want to highlight is grass is not a feed replacement. I'll repeat again, grass is not a feed replacement for broilers. They grow so incredibly fast that they need full nutrition available to them at all times. They can only process like 5 to 10% of the nutrients that are in grass or in bugs or whatever they pick around at and find in their environment. It is not enough to sustain their bodies. And we've seen that in our research, is that folks who have these birds forage, they just don't grow. They're very small. It takes longer for them to grow out. And it's actually a welfare consideration. So please always have feed available for them and make sure that the grass is just something to enrich their diet. A lot of people ask me about protein for broilers, and what we're seeing so far in our research is it really doesn't matter so long as you're around that 20 to 22% or higher to start. And you can get away with decreasing it over time to like 18%, but I wouldn't go too far below 18%, especially because most of us are processing our broilers around 7 to 8 weeks of age. Most of us, and I'm going to speak for the majority, and if you're in the minority, please speak up, but most of us don't want a 10-pound chicken when we're all said and done. We want something closer to like a 5 or 6 pound chicken. So keeping them for 7 to 8 weeks will achieve that in a Cornish cross type bird. This diagram, so it's actually a table from a commercial poultry feeding manual. This just shares the very specific crude proteins needed by the birds over time, but you can overfeed protein. It's not going to hurt them. Their bodies work a little differently from us. If they don't need the protein, they're just going to poop it out. It's not going to really harm them. It's going to harm your pocketbook a little bit, but it's not going to harm them. I have seen broilers fed up to 26 to 28% protein. Do I think that's excessive? But it's not going to hurt them. When we think about feed costs, feed is spendy. Feed is it is the number one cost of producing broilers. If you don't have any equipment, you're depreciating. Feed is generally more expensive when it is non-GMO or organic. The price is anywhere from a third to about 50% more than standard feed. Name brand is more expensive than a mill brand. Smaller volumes are more expensive than larger volumes, and higher protein is more expensive than lower protein. So if you have the choice between a 20% and a 26%, I'd choose the 20%. Next question I get most often, do I feed medicated feed? It's up to you. What is medicated feed? That's probably a better question. So medicated feed is a B vitamin inhibitor that's added to the feed in order to prevent what's called coccidiosis. Coccidiosis is very common in broilers, especially. Why? So broilers poop a lot and they produce a lot of moisture. And if they're in an environment that's on the damp side, that is on the warm and damp side, coccidiosis, which the little bugs are in the environment everywhere. It's just, do the birds pick them up? It can proliferate inside the birds and cause massive intestinal destruction, essentially, and the birds can die. So we combat this by either vaccinating our chicks for coccidiosis and not feeding what's called a coccidiostat or medicated feed, or we feed medicated feed. Don't do both because it'll negate. So you can do one or the other. Now, check the label on these, but most of the B vitamin inhibitors added to medicated feed don't have a withdrawal on them. So you can feed up to the time of slaughter on most of them, but please check the label to make sure. Now, in terms of cons, there's a little premium on that feed. It might be a couple pennies per pound, but it is a premium. You can't technically use it if you're claiming organic status on your chicken. And it can sometimes be hard to find, especially if you have limited numbers of farm supply stores or mills around your area. So you'll have to weigh the pros and cons, but it is definitely something to consider. And then finally, before I get off coccidiosis, just because it's been such a warm, wet spring, and this has been happening to a lot of folks, I want to show you what clinical coccidiosis looks like, because broilers very often will shed intestinal lining in their poop, especially when they're stressed. This looks like bubble gum. It looks like little red blobs. But when we're looking at clinical coccidiosis, that's entirely different. So intestinal shedding, normal. Blood, true blood in stool, not normal. And this is what blood in stool looks like. So this is actually a defecation from a chick, 4-week-old chick, and it is solid blood. There is not much else in there. The chick's not able to digest the nutrients. The intestine's so damaged they poop blood. This is a chick that's able to digest some nutrients, but you can see there is true blood, foamy, frothy, delicious looking blood around that fecal, that little poop right there. So if you see this, it's a problem. If you see intestinal lining, it's not a problem. All right, so before we go to our next section, I'm just going to touch on supplements really quick. Vitamins and trace minerals are super common to feed birds, especially in times of stress. So stressful times for broilers include shipping stress. So when we transfer them from the shipping box into the brooder, it includes stress of movement from the brooder into the outdoor housing, which is typically a chicken tractor on grass. It is also the time when there may be a heat spike or a cold spell or a rainy week, right? So any of these things that can cause stress are sometimes mitigated by adding vitamins and minerals. The literature shows that it does help, especially if provided for a couple of days before and after the stressful event. Electrolytes typically add with the vitamins and minerals. They're included in the same packs. Apple cider vinegar is something I hear a lot about. How it works is it acidifies the gut, and it theoretically makes it less susceptible to infestation by bacteria, helps with nutrient absorption, that sort of thing. It does not cure anything. It will not cure anything. So if you have chicks that are sick, do not feed them apple cider vinegar in hopes that they'll get better. They will not. This is more of a preventative measure rather than a reactionary measure. Prebiotics and probiotics, again, one of those preventatives to help with gut health. And you can feed treats to broilers. I don't know if they're really going to go for them, but if you do feed them less than 10% of the given diet. So, big breath. I'm going to see if there's any questions.
Sorry, I started talking and I was still muted.
You're
no
good.
questions so far. A couple comments just looking for clarification, but I think I covered everything in the chat box itself. If for some reason I didn't, feel free to remind me in the chat box again. But so far, Amy, we're doing good.
Super. All right, so let's move on to housing. Housing is one of those very individualized things. You can choose housing that looks a way that you want, that functions a way that you want, that is open on the bottom or closed in a shed. There's a lot of different options. You do not have to raise broilers on grass. You do not have to raise broilers inside the whole time. The way that you manage them is entirely up to you. But the essentials are that they are clean and dry, that they have protection from direct sun and wind, whether that be a barrier or a whole building that has protection. There is ventilation, so something that moves through to remove manure gas, to remove some of the moisture that these broilers will breathe out. Protection from predators is huge. I've seen some very devastating predator attacks, including there's one person that we're working on, that we're working with, who had 180 broilers out on pasture. Something got in and killed all but 40 in one night. So predation's a really big issue. There's mink, there's fox, there's coyotes, there's stray dogs. Hawks and eagles are a problem in some areas. So protection from predators is a big one. And we want to have food and water available at all times for these birds, especially water. Housing can look like a bunch of things. Like I said, it can be a barn where you have the birds in for their entire lives. That is absolutely fine. They're actually going to be sometimes more efficient that way. But with these barns, you can let the birds outside if you want. Sometimes they'll make it back in. Sometimes you have to lift them up and set them back in the barns because they're not the brightest bulbs in the box, especially the Cornish. The slow growth are a little smarter and the heritage are real on the ball. So keep that in mind when you're designing your coops. Housing can also look like this. This is a modified Soliton style chicken tractor. Some of the disadvantages is that it's really hard to get in there and catch birds, and that you have to knock birds away from the sides as you're moving it to make sure that you don't crush anybody. And this is actually one of the chicken tractors that I have on my farm, that I had on my farm before we had predation issues so severe that I had to close it all in, including the bottom. But this was basically the same design, but I could walk into it because I did not want to crawl. I did not want to crawl into something like this. So there's something called the Siskovich style chicken tractor, and it's made by a gentleman, designed by a gentleman named John Siskovich. The Soliton style chicken tractors are designed by a gentleman named Joel Soliton, and those are two very popular designs, but everybody has something different. Use what you've got. Use what you got instead of buying new. To make one of the Soliton style chicken tractors, if you're buying all the lumber new, it's going to run you around $300 to $400 to buy everything to make that chicken tractor. And that's a lot of money, especially if you're not running a lot of broilers at a time. If your flocks are small and you're not depreciating that out, that could be a huge investment. So something like this that costs $300 and something like this that costs $0 plus a little bit of renovations to make a predator proof. I mean, which one would you decide on? Up to you. But I'm a big fan of saving money. So we'll just throw that out there. We talked about predation. Everything likes chicken. Everything attacks chicken. It's not just at night, it's even during the day. We've got fox and birds of prey that typically attack during day, and then nighttime we have predators, and then we have scavengers. Like scavengers include things like opossums and raccoons, and usually those are the two main scavenger types. Like if they happen to run into a chicken, they will make an effort to get it and eat it. But then there are also things like mink, which can go in and kill an entire flock in a matter of minutes. It's pretty incredible how destructive they are, and they can get through holes bigger than an inch. Coyotes, which will just dig until they get in there. Owl, fox, fishers. If you have fisher cats in your area, they can also get into these coops. One of the big things is when you're building coops, build them with hardware cloth. Floors, if you have digging predators that are pretty severe. But hardware cloth is a typically good option to use to surround your coop, just because the old adage is chicken wire keeps chickens in, but that's it. It doesn't keep predators out. Hardware cloth is a little more robust and can help keep big predators out. University of Nebraska Extension has some information on building chicken coops on their website. These are old plans, but what's really cool about them is A, they're free, and B, they have a list of materials that you'll need to build each of those items. So if you're interested, take a look at this. I think it'd be worth your time. So air quality is one of the most important things in addition to food and water for broilers. First off, broilers poop a lot, and they poop a lot of moisture. They also breathe a lot, and that breath has a lot of moisture. And so when you walk into a closed building with chickens in it, you can feel the sticky, humid air. That is the perfect environment for coccidia, just saying. But it's also not great for their respiratory systems. It can lead to respiratory disease. It can result in manure off-gassing, including ammonia, which can actually damage the eyes. It can result in ammonia burns on the feet if the dampness in the environment does not let the bedding dry out long enough. So if you have the poultry, if you have your broilers in a building, make sure that building has good airflow in it. That can be made by eaves that you put into the coop. It can be made with an inlet and fan system if you have something large enough that you can install. You can have windows that you can open up to let airflow in. There's a whole bunch of options, but you have to have airflow if you put these birds into a barn type structure, especially as they get larger. Now, if they're in a Soliton style tractor or a other type tractor on pasture where they have the open bottom and open sides, this isn't really a concern. Air quality is going to be pretty good. And that is our first half. So I am going to check in and see if there are any questions first, and then I'll answer any of those that are there, and then we'll take a break. So I'm just checking in with you, Katelyn. Are there any questions in the chat?
None so far. We had somebody share that fishers have been a problem for them, and someone shared that they had a fox attack while they were right in front of them in their yard. So
Yeah.
while they were watching, and I just had commented that fox can be fearless. I think Amy and I have both had stories of like,
Yeah.
we're 5 feet away from a fox carrying away a chicken, and they don't care. They don't care. They
Oh,
keep doing it. So
no. Especially if you live in an urban or semi-urban community, because they're used to people, they have no fear. I've heard of foxes jumping fences while people are in the yard grabbing a chicken out from in front of somebody and running away. It is incredible. And we encountered a situation earlier this spring where we had a mink living under our chicken coop, and we didn't know until the mink ran across my husband's boots, grabbed a chicken 2 foot away, and then drug it over my husband's boots to bring it back under the coop, kicking and screaming. So, depending on how hungry they are, depending on how desperate they are. So like this time of year, it's kidding season. Foxes have kits. So they're going to be a little more fearless this time of year than normal times. But yeah, predation is always a problem with birds, unfortunately.
So other than that, looks like we're good for now.
Okay.
Let us know how long of a break you want to take, and
Yeah,
we'll go from there.
let's do 2 minutes. I'm going to round up, so let's reconvene here at 6:59.
Sounds
okay.
good. Thank you, Amy.
All right, see you soon. All right. We are back. Again, as you have questions, pop them in the chat. I don't think I'm going to ask about questions in between breaks. I'll just take a little pause. And if Katelyn unmute yourself. We'll go into the questions. So as we come back, let's go ahead and check in with our third poll. Have you gained knowledge and skills to use at home or on the farm so far? The second question in the survey, if you scroll down, raising broilers is for me, yes, no, or maybe. And then the third question is, I'd like to learn more about raising broilers, yes, no, or maybe. This looks great. So we've got, it seems like everybody's getting some knowledge and skills. Thank you. Hopefully you'll learn some more in the second half of this presentation. We have nobody that says raising broilers isn't for them yet. And if you end up changing your mind, that's okay, but this is really encouraging. I'm really excited for you. And then, yes, we'd like to learn more about raising broilers. So let's go. David Lewis says, as long as I don't have to process them. Yeah. We'll talk about some options coming up. There are some options to get them processed by other people. Those options are waning, unfortunately. So it's sometimes hard to find processors. So we'll discuss a little bit about that coming up here. All right. Biosecurity. We're going to throw up another question. I want you to know, what is biosecurity? It's a big word. It gets thrown around a lot, especially in regards to poultry. So is it the name of a movie, Keeping Germs Away, something scary, or I'm not sure?
Look at that, Amy. They're all pros.
I know. I'm going to go over it.
Although I think that something scary also counts too, because biosecurity terrifies me. So
it does. And when you know about it, it makes you fearful. But the good news is that once we know about it, once we know how to manage around it, it doesn't become as scary.
There you go. So most folks keeping germs away, which is like the best way to describe what biosecurity is. Something scary, again, because well, Amy will burst everybody's bubbles. So and for the I'm not sure, you're about to get a crash course. So thank you all for participating in that.
Yep. All right, here we go. So it's disease management. It's keeping germs away. Poultry diseases are common. They just are. There's a lot of poultry around. There's a lot of diseases in different areas and different flocks. They can result in everything from depressed growth rates, so slow growing birds when they're not supposed to be growing slow, dead birds, or carcasses that can be condemned because they are not fit for human consumption. Most of these are brought in with contaminated birds or contaminated footwear. So if we can eliminate those two variables, we can have healthier flocks. We also have this wicked thing, pretty sure you've heard of it, highly pathogenic avian influenza. Ring a bell? Yeah, unfortunately, we've been dealing with it for the past year and a half here, and that's from exposure to wild bird feces, and it can be devastating. So we're going to talk about that. And getting in a disease in a broiler flock quickly makes broilers go from profitable to a money sink. So a good reason to keep the germs away. Common diseases include avian influenza, which is actually not super common, but it's everywhere in the environment. So depending on the time of year, the risk could be greater. And it's devastating because it can kill an entire flock of birds in 24 to 48 hours. Then we have coccidiosis, which is fairly common in broilers. A lot of broiler flocks have it. A lot of flocks manage around it. And then Marek's disease. Marek's disease can be a problem in some lines, especially if you have, in some flocks, especially if you know you have Marek's disease on your property. If you do, you vaccinate for it and you're fine. So those are the most common diseases that we encounter. The life of broiler isn't very long, and when compared to something like an egg layer, so there's not as much to worry about. Okay, so management associated diseases. These are if we mess up and our environment isn't ideal for them. So breast blisters. This is a chicken carcass. This is a chicken carcass from a bird that was raised on wire. We don't raise broilers on wire. They develop leg problems, they develop hock ill or joint ill where they get infections in their joints, and they develop breast blisters because they are sitting all the time. They stand, sit, and when they sit hard, and that causes damage to the breast, and in reaction, scar tissue builds up. So that's what breast blisters are. Sometimes they're watery, sometimes they're fibrous, but nobody's going to want to buy a chicken that looks like that. This chicken, because it was raised on wire, is also missing a leg, and that is because when the foot was cut off of the drumstick, when we cut open that joint, a whole bunch of pus oozed out. That's joint ill. So something we could have very easily managed around. So that producer ended up taking birds off wire. Scratches and scarring are also something common that happens. So if we have birds in a chicken tractor and it gets really cold and they all pile, their nails are super sharp and they can scratch each other. And a lot of times those scratches become infected because they're walking in the poop and then they're scratching poop into the backs of other birds. So sometimes this will lead to infections and it'll result in the condemnation of a carcass. We could also have bruising. Typically, we don't see bruising. Where we see it is if a predator is harassing chickens on the outside of a coop and the chickens are thrashing against the side to get away, we'll see some bruising. Or if we handle them really roughly prior to processing, then we'll see some bruising. Typically, we don't see it though. Foot pad lesions, though, are very common in broilers. So this is a broiler chicken with the start of a foot pad lesion. This is where they were exposed to a wet environment. They had some of that ammonia burn on their foot pads, and then it caused an infection that went into their foot. So this is very common in broilers, especially if the bedding is wet and poopy and or they're not moved often when on pasture.
Amy, could you describe what you mean by on wire, raising chicks on wire? There's been a few questions that just popped up asking about the difference between that and using hardware cloth to prevent predators.
So I'm talking about the floor of a coop. So when we raise broilers, the floor of the chicken coop should either be the ground or it should be solid wood or solid plastic, whatever you're making, with some sort of bedding on top. You do not want to raise broilers on a wire floor. A lot of times it's made with hardware cloth. But the reason being is they don't get along well on wire. Yeah, the poop falls through, but there's a lot of these other things that I just talked about that could result. So that's what I mean. So when you use hardware cloth to keep out predators, you're doing the exterior of the coop. When you're building a floor of a coop, use something solid. Good question.
Right. And David just commented too to say that his brooder has a wire floor.
Depends on how long those birds stay in it. It's not a huge issue when the birds are really young, but as they start to gain weight and you start to see them sitting more, that's where it can become a problem. So I'd say I'd take them out of the wire floored brooder by 3 weeks. I wouldn't keep them in any longer than that. You might run into some processing concerns. So when you're processing them, you'll be able to see, are there breast blisters? Is there joint ill as a result of that? And if there is, you might consider moving to a solid floor brooder. Yeah, so it's just going to have to be a wait and see sort of thing if you've never used it before. Sick birds are easy to recognize when they're on death's door. They are not easy to recognize when they're just running around in the environment and being birds. They're prey animals, so they're going to hide their symptoms until they're ready to die. And birds can have ruffed feathers. So this bird here on the left actually has coccidiosis. So you could tell it's hunched over, roughed up. Typically they don't eat and drink. Eyes closed, standing by themselves, standing away from a heat lamp if they're young, or standing directly under a heat lamp if everybody else is not standing under a heat lamp. Those can be signs of sick birds. We can also see things like facial lesions that aren't just scratches, they're literally bumps and lumps, bluing of skin, and the next condition is a condition of layer birds, so we're not going to talk about that. But the one all the way to the right, you can see respiratory symptoms in birds, in meat birds. Sometimes they'll cough blood. Coughing blood is never good, so that means you've definitely got something cooking. It's also not super common. A lot of times broilers will wheeze and snick, and so snicking is where they go when they breathe, or it'll sound like bubbles when they're breathing. That means you've got a respiratory disease cooking. And sometimes these diseases result in high rates of mortality, so a large number of birds will die. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just result in depressed growth rate. So it depends on what's going on. And I would definitely have your vet check it out if you think it is significant. All right, so we saw this huge increase in egg prices. We saw shortage of chicken. We've seen shortage of eggs, and that's all because of bird flu. And so what bird flu is a highly pathogenic foreign animal disease. It is the most devastating foreign animal disease that we have seen in this country to date. Our last outbreak was in 2014, 2015. Before that, our first outbreak was in the early 80s. This time around, it's affected close to 59 million birds. Those birds are either sick or were euthanized prior to them dying naturally to help stop the spread of the disease. We've seen the distribution about twice in backyard flocks as we have commercial flocks. And part of the reason is because it's spread by wild birds in their feces. So a dime-sized amount of feces can infect and kill an entire flock of birds within a few days. So for that reason, if you have a lot of waterfowl nearby, if you have areas where wild waterfowl frequent, I would not put your broiler pens there. If there are areas that are more isolated from wild birds, I would choose that. If you have the opportunity to raise your birds indoors, and that is something that matches what your goals are as a producer, I would go ahead and do that. So if you see something weird, like a high amount of death loss, that's going to be the hallmark sign of this disease in broiler chickens, in addition to pretty severe respiratory systems followed by death. You can go ahead and contact your local extension office or your local state veterinarian or the United States Department of Agriculture with this number listed here. And if you think you've got something cooking in your flock, my recommendation, and it's just good practice, don't move birds off your property unless they're dead in a bag, because at that point they're going to be cooked, things are going to be killed, and you're going to be okay. But moving live birds can move viral shedders. This is of any disease. This isn't just a bird flu. And you don't want to spread that to other birds. So for us, what can we practically do in addition to keeping our birds separate from wild birds for disease mitigation? And what can we do besides wearing farm-specific footwear? We can also bring in chicks from disease-free certified farms. And this is found through the National Poultry Improvement Program. There's a link here. You can go ahead, click the link, find your hatchery by state that you're thinking of ordering from, and see if they're MPIP certified. If they're following practices to limit the spread of disease. They don't have active disease in their flocks, or they have very non-detrimental disease in their flocks. And a veterinarian has come out and tested their birds to make sure that they're free of certain diseases like salmonella, like bird flu. So wearing dedicated footwear is like the easiest way to help make sure your birds are safe. Don't wear that footwear into Tractor Supply. Don't wear that footwear into Walmart. Don't wear that footwear into Lowe's, right? The goal is to make sure that you're not transporting fecal material from infected flocks into your flock. Same thing goes with limiting outsider interaction with your birds. So if somebody comes and they're like, oh, pretty birds, I want to play with them, and they have birds at home, don't let them play with your birds. It's just good practice to keep things separate. Don't share tools between farms unless they're entirely clean and sanitized. Where I see this most for broilers is folks will share crates. So crates to transport them to and from the processor. There's a lot of poop in those crates. There's a lot of chance of disease transmission. Those crates are usually set on the ground at the processor. That processor sees hundreds of farmers a year. There's all sorts of stuff you could pick up there. So if you're sharing crates, I would wash and sanitize them. Easiest way is take them to a car wash, spend the $3 and just soap them up and get them washed and sanitized. Then you can go ahead and share them between farms with little issue. Same thing I recommend if you are dropping broilers off at a processor and it's going on their ground, like sitting with other birds, that sort of thing. Before you take them home, just give them a good wash down, and then you should be good to go. And this is some more, if you want to know more about biosecurity, this is a common sense small flock owner version of commercial biosecurity. So you can go ahead and click on this link. It's from the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service through the United States Department of Agriculture, and it will give you tips and tricks on how to keep your birds healthy. All right. So we're going to move into broiler enterprise efficiency considerations. And so we're going to throw up another poll question, and that is multiple choice. So you can click multiple answers. And I want you to share what you think impacts meat bird growth rates. Some, all, none. What do you think? So we're getting finished up here. So I'm really excited because a lot of you have chosen breed and management. Awesome. Like we already talked about that. That's in the bag, right? Believe it or not, the rest of these are also things that impact broiler growth rates. And we're going to talk about that because some of them are quite significant. All right. So I'm going to talk about chick costs super quick before I go into efficiencies. So with chick costs, you can pay anywhere from $2 to $5 for a meat bird chick. If you want to get the heritage type roosters, sometimes you can pick them up for $1. Sometimes people give them away. So something to consider there. Now, chick cost will vary depending on hatchery and also depending on the number of chicks you order. The more chicks you order, typically you get a price break. They also vary in price if the hatchery offers sexed chicks. So when you normally buy broilers, and the hatchery offers like one choice, it's buy Cornish crosses, and it just has one line, and you put like, I want 20 birds, you put your order in. They're going to be more often than not straight run, which means 50% males, 50% females. If the hatchery offers sexed birds, so they separate out the males and females, males are typically going to cost more than females, and then straight run or unsexed is going to be somewhere in the middle. The reason being is males are more efficient. Spoiler alert. And something else to consider is shipping costs. Some hatcheries include the cost of shipping in the cost of the bird. Some don't, and they charge an extra fee on top. So take a look into that when you're comparing across hatcheries, in addition to the breed you want, to make sure that you're getting a chick at a price that suits your goals. So let's talk about feed efficiency super quick. This is pretty apparent. This is the breed comparison. We're going to compare Cornish cross to slow growth. And I just want you to look at some of the dollar signs based on some of the efficiencies between the breeds. We're going to pretend that we're taking a Cornish cross to a 7.5 pound bird, which is pretty typical for an 8-week-old Cornish cross. That'll yield a 6 pound carcass. And the feed conversion, let's say, is a little higher than normal, so around 2.2 pounds of feed per pound of live gain. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply the pounds of live weight by a pound of live gain to get the number of pounds of feed that that animal is going to eat over the course of its life. So 16.5 pounds in this example. If you decide to charge $4.50 a pound for your chicken, I'm jumping into the farm business management waters, Katelyn, just to let you know, but this is my limited capacity. Like after this, I'm done. So thank you for all that you do.
You're doing great.
So if you're charging $4.50 a pound, you're going to earn a profit of $27 per bird if you assume that that bird is $6, or is 6 pounds. If you have a slow growth bird raised to 12 weeks, it's going to yield a 4.5 pound carcass because it matures at a smaller weight. The feed conversion is higher at 3.5 pounds, just say in this example. So that means it consumed about the exact same amount of feed as the Cornish cross. Now, if you go ahead and sell that bird at the exact same price, your income per bird is about $7 less. So you have a smaller bird that you're getting less money for that you put more money into. So this is just to illustrate that there are cost consideration differences in raising these two breeds, in addition to the ethos, like what your goals are in terms of what kind of bird you want to produce, what the texture of the flesh you want, what kind of foraging ability, that sort of thing. Coming back to the spoiler alert, males are more efficient than females. This chart, this is in grams, and so it's a little bit hard to read. But what I want to show you is this is a commercial chart for a commercial strain of broiler, like the most popular broiler breed in the entire world. And looking at 49 days, which is 7 weeks of age, we see that their average, a female average, so we're going to do cumulative feed conversion. Okay. If you can see where I've highlighted, we're going to look at this column, cumulative feed conversion. So a female at 49 days puts on 1 pound of feed, 1 pound of gain per every 1.8 pounds of feed. It's pretty good, right? Now, if you look at a male of the exact same age, exact same lineage, it's going to use 0.08 pounds less feed to achieve that same rate of gain. So males will end up larger at the end. They will also convert feed more efficiently. But as they age, their efficiency decreases. If we want to consider how these birds best put on fleshing, they're going to put flesh on most efficiently, so require the least feed per pound of gain at around like 5 or 6 weeks. Unfortunately, that carcass is pretty small, and most of us want something a little bigger. So the trade-off is that we are then feeding them a little more, they're growing a little slower, they're, using more feed for bodily functions or excreting it or whatever, not putting it into flesh as efficiently. But you get a bigger bird out of it. The difference isn't huge. So this is cumulative feed conversion. We're going to look at 7 weeks. We're up to 1.76 pounds of feed per pound of gain. And then if we look again another 2 weeks later, if we take that bird out another 2 weeks, we increase that by about 0.3 points. So 0.3 pounds more feed per pound of gain. It could be significant, especially if you're taking birds out to like 10 or 12 weeks to get that giant carcass. Another consideration is taking these birds out longer means that there's more of a chance of them to have heart attacks, larger chance for them to get eaten by something, that sort of thing. Some of the new research, some of the new things that we're finding in the research project that we're working on is that time of year is influencing how birds grow. Longer days, so summer, beginning of fall, the birds tend to eat more because they have more daylight hours and they tend to grow a little bit better. We see really large live weights of birds of the same age in fall versus spring. Cold, wet weather, we find stunts growth, and it results in more cardiorespiratory disease, which I think in theory is the reason why they're growing a little bit slower. Plus, they're taking more of that energy that they're consuming and using it to shiver and keep warm. So, something to consider if you're getting broilers in like March versus getting broilers in June. Contrary, hot, humid weather increases the chance of cardiorespiratory disease, flip overs, heart attacks, ascites, that sort of thing. So it's all a trade-off. There's definitely pros and cons to each season, but something to think of when you're raising birds. Environmental management is super important. You want to have a dry area where your broilers can spend most of their time, where they can get out of rain, wind, and snow. You want to limit drafts, especially when young, just because that can lead to some cardiorespiratory disease. And in general, a wet, cold meat bird is a dead meat bird. It's just kind of how it goes. If it rains and their pen is soupy, just say you have a pen on grass and you're moving it around, you might want to consider throwing some extra bedding material, moving that pen to higher ground, something to get those birds out of that wet environment, because they're just not going to do well. Any animal wouldn't do well, but broilers are especially susceptible, especially Cornish crosses. All right. So now we're going to flip gears from raising and management into the regulations, which is some questions that I know you guys wanted to have answers to. So this information is most pertinent to those of us who are going to sell birds as, just sell birds. For those of us who want to just raise them for home use, there's some resources in here, so stick around. Our second to last poll question here is, are you thinking of selling your meat chickens? So your options are yes to friends and family only, yes to the community, yes to hotels, restaurants, and farm shops. No, they're just for home use, or I still don't know. And you can only choose one. I know that there's a lot of options, but choose the one that's going to be your primary market, if you have a market. Okay, so it looks like most of us want to either sell them to the local community, whether that be individual sales or farm stores or schools or that sort of thing, or they're for home use. And we have, you know, a couple of you who are maybe not so sure. So let's go through some of these regulations. First, I want to talk about processing setups very quickly. In that is the newest and highest technologically advanced equipment necessary to raise broilers, to process broilers. The answer is no. You don't need that $2,300 equipment setup in order to produce a quality, wholesome bird for sale. You can do the bare minimum and it can work. This setup right here is a very bare bones processing setup. This cost the farm about $350 to set up, but it's got everything you need. It's got clean and sanitizable surfaces. It's got a plucker that works. It's a scratch and dent, but it works. The scalder here is a bushel basket that they boil over a turkey burner, and then their chill tanks are food grade 55-gallon plastic drums with the tops cut out. It is very bare bones, but it does the job and it meets the regulations. So what are the regulations? If you're processing birds, you have two options. You can either take birds out to a processor or you can process them at home. If you're processing them at home, you can process up to 1,000 broilers or 250 turkeys, where one turkey is equivalent to 4 broilers a year per farm. This is not per farmer, this is per farm. You must raise the birds yourself, to slaughter them yourself. You cannot process for other people, and you cannot sell these birds across state lines to hotels, restaurants, or institutions like schools, like farm stores. And you cannot, but you can sell them directly to the end consumer, and you can sell them at farmers markets, and you can sell them at a farm stand that is on your property. That is all legal. You cannot sell them to other people to resell. So this encompasses like farm stores where you might sell for a certain price, they mark it up and they resell it. And then we already talked about the other ones. So there's a lot of limitations here, but there's also a lot of flexibility. You can process these birds, you can sell them to the end consumer. And if you don't have what's called a 5A small enterprise exempt processor in your area, this might be your only choice to get birds processed. The 5A exempt processors, they have to be a small enterprise to allow them to process a bird for you, and then you can sell it to a hotel, restaurant, institution, or farm shop. You still can't sell those birds across state lines. The only way you can do that is if they're USDA certified. We do not have any USDA certified poultry processors, at least on the western side of the state. There's one that I know of out towards New York City. Are they accepting birds from small producers? I don't know. I'm not gonna say, I don't know. But we don't have anything west of I-81, essentially. So if you want to get your birds processed USDA, there are some places like in Vermont that does them, but I mean, transporting broilers all the way up to Vermont to get them USDA processed just doesn't make sense. For some people, it might make sense for others, but like in my money scrounging head, it doesn't make sense. But I'm not going to deter you if that's something you want to do. So yeah, just something to keep in mind there. If you want to know more about any of these things that I'm talking about, there is this wonderful cooperative document by Cornell Small Farms and Cornell Cooperative Extension that outlines the on-farm poultry slaughter guidelines. I do have a link to that in the next slide, so you can take a look at it. It goes through all sorts of stuff like good manufacturing practices. So what kinds of surfaces do you have? Make sure you use food safe sanitizers. Make sure that you chill stuff. It's got sanitation standards, operational procedures, like how long it should be in between processing your bird versus selling it fresh versus selling it frozen. How long does it need to be to get your bird down to a temperature of 45 degrees internally so that it's food safe, that sort of thing. And that can be found at the link below.
Amy, we just had someone comment in on the USDA processor that's near the city. They have a minimum of 1,000 birds.
Well then, so unless you're raising 1,000 birds, they won't do them for you. And that makes sense because USDA processors are typically pretty large scale. And it might not make sense for them to run those birds because with USDA, there's a lot more record keeping and tracking and things they have to do. So to make it worth their time, it's probably why they've got that limit. So thank you for whoever commented that. Great. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about insurance requirements. This is my last slide. Insurance is important. If you're selling birds to friends or family, do you need insurance? Probably not. But if you're starting to sell to like friends of friends or coworkers of coworkers or like friends of coworkers or just the general public at large, it's a good idea to have at least product liability insurance and something good, just because you don't want to be at risk should something happen. Of course, you're going to do all of the food safe things. You're going to raise broilers in a wholesome way. But if somebody happens to get sick, you want to make sure that you're covered. You'll check with your insurance provider to make sure that they cover this activity, especially if you're processing on farm. Some insurance providers require that you provide a certificate that you've completed a course on food safety and processing in order for them to cover you. And if you need that certificate, Cornell has developed a low-cost, self-paced processing course that you can take, that you'll get a certificate at the end you can supply to your insurance provider. Make sure that's what your insurance provider needs prior to taking the course, because we'd hate to have you spend $50 to $100 in order to not get something that can help you. The course is really good. I think you should take it if you don't know anything about broiler processing. We're going to go over that in our next broiler video, or sorry, our next broiler video webinar. But the big details are like the more minute things are going to be in this course. I do recommend it. So something to keep in mind, area for further education. All right, and that's all I've got for you for tonight. We're going to close this with a poll question. We do have a post-class survey. When you click out of this screen, this webinar, it should automatically pop up for you in your internet browser. We will also go ahead and send the survey with the email that we send out the recording with. And Katelyn's also going to pop it in the chat box, so you've got it in 3 places. This survey helps us to understand where we've met your needs, where we still need to meet your needs, and what other topics that we can provide information on that will be useful to you. So help us help you. Thank you. All right, and it looks like most of us are a yes. So thank you. Appreciate that. It'll only take a couple minutes, if that, to complete.
At this point too, we'll stay on here for a little bit. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We also would encourage you to just fill out the survey right now, because if you're anything like me, you're going to get distracted by something else and not complete it. So we can hang out here for a little bit to do that as well. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Amy, for such a good presentation.
You're welcome.
We do have another one coming up. When's the second broiler?
July 12th.
July 12th. So that one will be actually going through poultry processing. We're going to provide, like Amy mentioned, videos with voiceover, and Amy's going to walk us through the process. And it's going to be set up in a format that you can just watch that video and preparations for processing your own birds. Or to talk yourself out of processing your own birds, either one.
I mean, the only thing that we don't have in there is smell-o-vision, because processing broilers is a smell unlike anything you've ever smelled.
Yeah, it's not great.
No, it's not, but the product is worth it if you can make it through the smell. If you can't, like, I totally understand.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So for the recording sakes, thank you, everybody. And